Greetings everyone, this is Ohio Dan. The topic for today's video is this sort of trending, popular thing that I've seen within the men's community over the past couple of years, maybe not even that long, of saying that certain men are not going their own way, they were sent their own way. And there's a difference, and we need to be aware of the distinction with that. And I wanted to give my opinion on this because I do think it's a multifaceted topic where there's a legitimate concern with this, but there's also kind of a ill intent with this sort of accusation or categorizing men as not going their own way as much as being sent their own way. And just the overall conclusions that I think we can reach when actually looking at this for what it is. So I've noticed a problem with this distinction that people are drawing between the men who choose to go their own way after many experiences with women. Those are the men that apparently are choosing to go their own way because they could get women, versus those who are sent their own way because of rejection by women. And that's usually what the argument entails, is that you have the men that are really just incels, and they're being sent their own way, but they're calling themselves MGTOW, and they're really not. And I know I mentioned that this is something that has been trending for a couple of years, but it goes years back to sort of the whole Aaron Clarey versus Barbarossa thing, if anybody remembers that, where Aaron Clarey was trying to verify that Barbarossa could get women and therefore was truly a man going his own way, with the implication that if you can't get women, you're not really going your own way, you're just sent your own way, right? The vocabulary has sort of built up after that, but the same idea was present even back then with that little spat. And I'm not trying to rehash that again, right? This is something that occurred years ago and it really doesn't matter now. But the idea of saying that there's a difference between a man going his own way and a man being sent his own way, the idea itself is not new. It's just that it's taken this sort of new popular form of accusing men of being sent their own way. That's a new phrase that I haven't seen very much up until the past couple years. The idea has been there, though, for some time. And in one sense, this is a valid concern, potentially, for the future of these men that are being sent their own way, so to speak. Should these men eventually earn enough money or develop more masculine qualities that make them more attractive to women? And this goes back to another thing that has been said many times for years within the community of being one BJ away from the plantation, right? That is the sort of legitimate argument, at least to some degree, about saying, well, these men are being sent their own way, so how are they going to react if they ever do get attention from women? Are they going to be resolute in their views and say that I'm not going to get married or have kids or live with a woman? The three basic tenets of MGTOW. I like to throw the idea of not dating a woman that you work with in there as well, but without getting into any of that, essentially, these guys are being sent their own way because they don't have enough experiences with women, supposedly, and therefore they're going to be one BJ away from the plantation. And so maybe in a kind of a semi-legit sense, you can be concerned about these men not making bad decisions with women in the future if their position changes. Let's say they're not necessarily an ugly man, they're just not Chad or Tyrone. Maybe they're not in good physical shape to start off with. And of course, if you're a young man, you're probably not making that much money. Let's say 10 or 15 years down the road, you've got a steady income, you're doing well. Not just steady, but it's increasing over time. And you have lost weight, you have gotten in better shape. Now maybe all of a sudden women are more interested in you, and you just abandon the idea of going your own way because now you can get girls. That is something that has occurred. That is something that men can do within this community in the past. I've seen guys that have said that they're MGTOW, then they get a girlfriend and they stop making content, and then they come back and say, oh, all women are bad, they're all evil because my girlfriend did this and that. But it's because they lacked consistency and they lacked integrity. And so they ended up going through this cycle multiple times where they were one BJ away from the plantation and they went back, and then they came back to the men's community after the relationship didn't work. I realize that's a thing. that men without these prior experiences may be more tempted to make foolish choices with women once that option is more realistically on the table, and the community can provide solid information to these guys to guard against this outcome. So they're not going to go back to the plantation whenever a woman does show interest in him. And so maybe we could work with those men and realize that that's their vulnerability and actually try to help them. But that being said, more often I get the impression that that is not really what is meant by saying that these men or any given men within the community were sent their own way. That accusation or that overall statement is being used to imply that these men are just inherently inferior because of how they initially reached their conclusions about dating, relationships, etc. from their own point of view, and that's not necessarily the case. And this does certainly relate back to what I talked about in my last video, where I talked about the male dominance hierarchy unfortunately becoming more and more of a tool that's used within the men's community against other men. Of, I'm better than you, I've had more success with women, I deserve higher status than you, you suck because you don't make enough money compared to me. This is a thing that runs parallel to that, parallel to basically applying the male dominance hierarchy that we find in the blue pill world, that we find in everyday life already. It's the same type of mentality of, well, I'm a man going my own way and I've had 100 women, so I'm better than you because you're a virgin or you've been with just a few people or whatever the standard happens to be in that argument. That's what I see happening more often. It's used against these men that are supposedly being sent their own way rather than to try to help them, rather than to try to realize that, okay, if women are more interested in them later on down the road, we don't want them getting a woman pregnant. We don't want them getting married and making poor choices for themselves, unless that's what they decide they have to do. But we're trying to basically equip men to make good decisions for themselves. And maybe some of them are a BJ away from the plantation now, but after being involved in the community for a period of time and after absorbing what other men have to say, they may realize, okay, maybe later on I will have success with women and maybe I won't, but regardless, I'm done. I'm out. There's no path for me here, and I'm going to control my basic urges and not get a woman pregnant and not put myself in that situation. Right? There is an argument to be made for helping those men out, but a lot of this sent their own way rhetoric does not seem to be aimed toward helping these men out whatsoever. It seems to be about, I'm a better man than you. These men are just not actually at our level. We can make fun of them now, right? Like that seems to be really what's happening. It's more of a pejorative than it is informational, from what I can tell at least. How a man leaves the plantation, as we call it, to seek his own path shouldn't be as important as his fortitude in making the best of his journey. It doesn't matter how the man reached that conclusion. It matters what his potential is as a man who may not get married or have kids, who may realize that society and women within society, by and large, don't have his better interests in mind, and that you're better off just walking away from those expectations. It's about helping men regardless of how they've reached these conclusions, or at least it should be. After all, as a counterexample, a man who has had many women and ends up taking the red pill after a nasty divorce, let's say, may end up returning to a similar situation in the future after his anger subsides, right? Maybe he absorbs a lot of red pill information, but he's used to being in a relationship. He's used to having attention from women, and he can't actually break away from that, especially once he cools down and the red pill rage is not there anymore. It may be very easy for him to just go back to doing what he did before and trying to find another woman and acting as if it's going to be different this time. We see this happening quite a bit. And so just because a man has experience with relationships with women doesn't mean that he's not going to go back to the plantation as well, ultimately. On the other hand, a man who is initially sent his own way may find his own self-worth in other activities that don't involve women or societal approval through women, and then no longer place much value on female companionship at all. And so, again, if he absorbs the information within the men's community and becomes self-aware, so to speak, then he may just not care about what women think in the future. He may work hard toward his own ends and may make a decent amount of money and have a certain amount of success and improve his health and improve his physique. And then women want to be with him and he's just like, nah, I don't care. I'm done. I've checked out. Right? We've talked about this in the men's community for years as well, that when you actually truly go your own way, not for women, but just to better yourself, the paradox is that you attract women sometimes at some point. Eventually, if you are successful with meeting your goals and doing your own thing, women may actually be attracted to that, and now you have to shoo them away, basically, because you're done dealing with that nonsense. You're done trying to entertain the idea of finding a conventional relationship and having a family and all that. If you're done with that, and that's part of what led to your success in the first place, the irony is that can make you more attractive to women. And at that point, it's useless to you unless you're in the pump and dump category, but that has its own risks and its own moral implications. But you're not, at that point, going to consider that in terms of any sort of serious relationship with a woman. And so, really, it doesn't make sense that a man who's sent his own way is necessarily in a worse situation than a man that's addicted to pussy, basically. At least that guy that was sent his own way, well, he's never been with a woman. He doesn't know the ups and downs. He doesn't know that it can be really good and then really bad soon after. He doesn't care. He just finds other things to build his life around. Why isn't that potentially a stronger hand to play in the long run than, well, I've been with 300 women and now I'm red-pilled, but I'm addicted to poon, so I'm just going to keep going after that. Oh, now I got a woman pregnant. Oh, now I've got a false accusation made against me. How is that a better starting point necessarily? Again, the initial first argument that I made about being a BJ away from the plantation could still apply to men that don't have experience with women and are, as the phrase goes, sent their own way. It could be that we need to help those men not care whether women give them attention later on down the road, but this could apply to men that have had a lot of experience with women as well. So it doesn't make sense to me that one starting point is necessarily better than the other as far as walking away from this gynocracy, walking away from the system as it is. So I think it's important to recognize that the true merit of all this lies in the end result of a going your own way type of philosophy, regardless of how a particular man may have gotten there and may have reached these conclusions for himself. We should guard against placing too much weight on which men had more options at the time of rejecting conventional relationships, and instead encourage the men in this community to develop to their potential and to act in a self-aware manner around the women that they may encounter or engage with, regardless of their potential for attraction, regardless of whether they were sent their own way or whether they've been with 100 different women, or whether maybe they've been with 1 or 2 women and they got married and had a long-term relationship and it ended badly, or some mix of any of those things where maybe he had a lot of women and then got married and then it blew up in his face. Why does it matter? Why is that important if we're not trying to use that information and use that starting point just as a way to attack men, just as a way to, again, as I mentioned with the dominance hierarchy, just say, I'm better than you, I'm more of a man, you're less of a man because you haven't had these experiences with women, so I'm MGTOW and you're not. As ridiculous as it is, that seems to be what I'm seeing more of. And again, it fits in with what I said in the previous video about all this. Ultimately, why does it matter if a man is sent his own way initially, if this assessment only creates unnecessary division and potentially shames these men from active participation within the men's community? What is the advantage of treating men like this? How are we helping men by saying, oh, you're really just an incel, you're not one of the real MGTOWs? How is that productive? How is that going to help these men not go back to the plantation? Is that really the goal of saying that a man is sent his own way? Or is most of this rhetoric just a matter of trying to show up other men, trying to treat other men as being less than you so that you can feel better about yourself, trying to act as if these men are the problem within the men's community because they couldn't actually walk away. They were just forced away from conventional relationships with women and from the societal standards. So they're just losers, and we're not going to associate with them because we're the true men going their own way or whatnot. Is that really a helpful way to treat men that come into this community? Is that really useful other than to just demean these men? Is that really even consequential other than, again, knowing where the vulnerabilities might lie, knowing that, okay, if this man doesn't have experiences with women and he does become more successful, he has more resources, he develops masculine traits and qualities because he realizes what works for him without getting into the whole alpha beta stuff. Again, that kind of thing really shouldn't even be within this community in terms of making judgments whatsoever. But if you're going to say, well, this man was just sent his own way and he didn't have success, we're just going to basically say that he's not true MGTOW. How does that help him make decisions for himself later on down the road if he is more attractive to women? How is that something that benefits the community as a whole? Chase off the men that don't have experience with women because there's kind of a litmus test or there's a certain barrier to entry now based on that? Like, is that really what we want to be about as a community? Is that something that helps men overall? Or is that something that just is used to basically bludgeon men in a way that's consistent with the whole alpha beta paradigm, the whole dominance hierarchy, just try to bring other men down, right? That's essentially what I see this doing more often than not. I don't think it's really about these men in particular that are sent their own way being a BJ away from the plantation. I think it's just about ego. I think it's just about a lot of the corrupting influences within the men's community lately. I don't think it's about having a healthy perspective on what to do with this. I don't think it's about identifying where the vulnerabilities for these men might lie versus men that are addicted to pussy and have had easy access to girls their whole lives and then try to go their own way but can't get over that addiction. Or men, again, that have bought into traditionalism and they find the men's community or MGTOW content or whatever the case may be, and they like it, but their traditional ideology is pulling them back and telling them that, no, you just need to find the right woman and it's your fault that the relationship didn't work and you just need to do this better. It makes sense to try to identify these vulnerabilities within certain men and kind of guide the conversation in the direction of, let's help this man get over his addiction to pussy, or let's help this man realize that women are not really all that and that you can have a happy life without ever being attracted to women. It doesn't seem like it's about sort of tailoring the content to help these different groups of men. It's about basically, again, ego, dominance hierarchy, I'm better than you, you're not real MGTOW because I am and I'm a better man. That kind of stuff is not healthy, and it's not actually going to help these men. And so I really think that we need to not use this whole sent your own way type of rhetoric. I think that we need to abandon that and just sort of try to more or less help men that come into the community regardless of their background. And I think it used to be more that way, but now you see a lot of these sort of accusations, a lot of these really poorly intended phrases, poorly intended ideas being put out there. There is no real attempt to help these men that might otherwise consider themselves incels. There's just kind of an attempt to stop them from accessing MGTOW type content. And I don't think that's good. And I think we need to stop with this whole unnecessary division, you were sent your own way instead of going your own way type of rhetoric.